You've landed at Spark Launch, the guide star for embracing what it means to be neurodiverse. I'm Mike Cornell, joined by CEO of Spark Launch, Chaya. Here, we navigate mental health triumphs and tribulations from all across the spectrum, charting a course to the shared experiences that unite us, and discovering how to embody the unique strengths within neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, igniting your spark and launching it into a better tomorrow. Hello there, I'm Mike.
I'm Chaya.
And today we want to welcome onto the show Ahmadreza Tadrisi, a psychotherapist with a master's in clinical psychology. Over the last 4 years, he's conducted over 3,000 therapy and counseling sessions with more than 100 clients. His integrative, client-centered approach combines therapy and coaching, particularly focusing on adult ADHD, and inspired by his own diagnosis, dedicated to creating a safe, inclusive space for all individuals. Welcome to the show.
Hello, guys. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me.
So, Ahmadreza, why don't you tell us about your background and where are you talking from today, and where do you live, and a little bit of your history and how you got here? We would love to hear.
Sure. So I'm talking from Tehran, the capital of Iran. And well, the thing is that right now I'm around 30 years old. So right before around 5 years ago, I actually didn't know anything about ADHD. And I didn't even know that I would become a psychotherapist back in time. So all these turning of events and, all that leading up to here was a very interesting turn of events for me in my life. And before that, I was studying sports sciences, and I had a job in sports science. And I was, doing okay in life, but there was always this cloud of, uncertainties over in my head that there are things that I felt like they weren't clicking in my personal life and in my work and even my studies. And I always had these questions that couldn't find, proper answers for. And right around maybe, 2017 or maybe a little bit after, I started going to therapy, and well, that was very good for me. But what happened in there is that those questions still remained after a year or so. So what happened in that moment was that I really got interested in psychology and the work of a therapist. So I made a decision back in the time that maybe this is the job that I want to do in my life. So I tried to, start this transition, changing the field and studying psychology based on a route that was possible for me in my country. And a funny thing that happened was that we have an entrance exam for going into universities in Iran. So when you want to, change the field and go into a new, it doesn't matter if it's a bachelor or master's or a PhD, you have to prepare for an entrance exam. And I was in that transition period back in the time when I made that decision. And I was reading, about all sorts of things about psychology, whether it was therapeutic or general things or neuroscience or other stuff. And there was a day that I was reading this book about psychopathology. And the funny thing is that I had read this before, but there was a moment that I saw something in the text that was saying, in order to have ADHD, you can't be either attention deficit or hyperactive. So before that, I thought that one, in order to have ADHD, they have to receive both diagnoses, both sets of symptoms for a confirmed diagnosis. And that's, that was like the first click in my head that, oh, you can have, one part of the condition and you don't have to be hyperactive at all. And the reason that clicked for me, because I started reading about the symptoms, and it kind of makes sense for myself. Like I saw that I have all these, inattention symptoms, and their influences in my life, their representations in different areas, in different settings. And I never really considered myself hyperactive in those sense. So I started reading more. I read a book about ADHD from Dr. Hollowell. I think he's quite famous for this arena. And it was like the first moment in my life that all those questions those, clouds of different things that I had, they all find an answer in a moment. And so eventually it was kind of self-diagnosis. And then later on, I went for the confirmation. It was very clear for me that even if I hadn't received the confirmation, deep down I knew that this is the right answer. And really that changed everything. Like from that moment, it kind of, I found a clear path for what I want to do after this. So when I went to the field, and luckily enough, that actually helped with that entrance exam too, because before that moment, I wasn't really doing good in terms of studies, going through all the lessons. But from the moment that I realized what was the problem, it actually helped with the exam. And I went to university, I finished those masters, and I actually recently got into a PhD. So I'm trying to further up these studies in terms of psychology and all that besides my work. And I'm trying to, help as much as I can to the same people that have been going through the same things and, are experiencing the exact same things that I went through, like lacking information, lacking knowledge about, about these problems, that what is happening with you when you're living like that and you have all these questions over your head and struggles. Nobody is really providing a very clear answer for all those things. Although right now it's kind of getting better with all these, especially social media informations like on Instagram or YouTube or other areas. But well, I'm trying to do my part, and I hope that I've been successful in that.
Isn't it fun understanding yourself? I think that is the journey that we should all take, because there's so much information inside of us. Understanding how our brains work and what works for us, what doesn't, is amazing. I wish we all took time to do that and just honor ourselves and honor others for who they are. And you talked about hyperactive. Right. Hyperactive, I think, is a very misunderstood term. And if you just listen to the word hyperactive, you would think someone jumping off the walls and bouncing on the bed. Right. And with my own understanding of myself, I know that the way my hyperactive brain works is right now, like I'm excited about this conversation, and I get a million thoughts I want to interrupt. And so that's one of my things that I always fight, is not to interrupt people. But it happens because I have a zillion thoughts, and I know that I can take care of it with a book and a pen, and I can write down the thoughts. And then the inattentive is when I'm not interested at all in the topic. So I think it's a very misunderstood term. And for you, I can imagine growing up in Iran. I don't know how it is out there, what the awareness is. And even here, it's just beginning, right? People are just living, not knowing whether they're neurodivergent, trying to fit in and be like the rest of them is challenging. I mean, people are going through that constantly. So tell us how it is in Iran.
Well, so I think during my childhood and adolescence, I never heard the word ADHD even once. So I can't really blame anybody for that, because I think the word ADHD itself is not that old in terms of, history and all that. I think it was kind of established in the 80s. And even before 90s in the West, they weren't sure whether they could diagnose this in adults. And I even heard somewhere, I don't know whether it's the true information or not, but it was illegal to diagnose adults in UK until 2008. So if that's correct, that's, very, very recent. So I never heard of it. And I was one of those students that, people were calling it, I don't know, some sort of gifted or exceptional in terms of, being smart and always having the best grade in the class. And I was doing fine till high school. And, I was one of those students that everyone was talking about as one of those, top guys in the class. But something, suddenly changed. So I went into this school that was for exceptional talents in my country. It's nationwide. And they collect all these students from all cities based on some IQ tests or stuff like that. So they're like trying to prepare you for top fields in the universities and colleges so that, they can say that they have worked on that. And then, they will provide for the society, something like that. But when I went to that high school, like everything changed for me in terms of performance. So my performance started to decline massively in terms of grades and, doing the homeworks and all those things that they were asking from us. And, everything plummeted. Since first high school. And, that begs you the question, like, what's happening there? And what is going on? What is it that student that previously was one of the top ones in all of school, not in his class, suddenly, is having grades that belongs to maybe the weakest students in the class or so. So, I was having all these questions and people were asking me all of these questions. I even remember that I was referred to different counselors, school counselors. I even went to a psychiatrist when I was around 18, and nobody really had any answer. They were just pushing me that with messages like stop being lazy and just, do whatever that you've been asked to do and do your studies and all these. And, we obviously know that those sort of things don't work, especially for young ones with ADHD. So nobody really knew anything. And I insisted, I visited different counselors, I even visited psychiatrists, but they couldn't find the answers. And it kind of, you have to adapt in that kind of situation. You can't find the answers, you can't find the reasons, but you try to, find some sort of meaning in all that. And that's, I think, a little bit dangerous because when you don't know the right answer, you just kind of make a stories for yourselves. And when the story is not right, you're going to struggle. Like you try to, make your performance better. You try to get better in anything that you're trying to achieve. But the struggle is always continuing and you're literally suffering in terms of, psychological terms and sometimes even in terms of physical, your body suffers. You show symptoms that you don't, have to experience in real, life. And that was kind of my life during those days, especially before, being 20. And it wasn't like I was doing that bad after the school was finished. But I think it matters that when you are forming an identity for yourself, when you're going into adulthood, things should make sense. You have to find a ground for yourself that you feel like this is me and this is how I should live my life. But I think when you don't know about your ADHD, when you don't know that some of the things that you're experiencing are coming from where, then that identity is always, it's like up in the air. You're trying to try different things, going through different remedies and therapies, but you never really, find somewhere that you can truly feel peaceful. And that's why I think finding a name for your problems actually, helps. And this is why I sometimes see that people say, "Oh, why should we have these categories? Why should we have these labels?" And doing this stuff with people. I think I've never had a client myself that they don't hear about their problems and the name, and they get upset. Like they are always finding a new meaning in their lives, and I always see that it's actually helping them in terms of even finding a new community that they see that there are people out there that are having the same struggles or facing the same challenges, and they can share their feelings with each other. They can share these experiences with each other, and I think it's helpful for the community and all those people, just like the way that we found each other, right? So that was the name that helped us, find each other from two, I think, different continents in this, in this earth. And I think it's a fascinating thing. And it's actually good that I think the information is circulating around. I know that not all of them are correct, but I think it's still better that you still hear the name. Like when I was before 20, I never even heard what was ADHD. Like nobody knew anything about it. At least now people are talking about it. I know that not all of them having the exact right, interpretation of different things about it, but even the fact that they're talking about it, I think it's a good thing. And I hope that after quite some time, we can find many more people that are struggling, and I hope that we can help them.
Go back to what you were talking about with labels. There is such a thing as limiting label, of course, but I think blanketing that all labels are bad, especially, I think there's a feeling, and it's not really with people with ADHD or autism or anything else. I don't think most feel this way, but it's mostly the like allistics that feel like, well, calling them that is an insult in some way. When I think we approach it more from, like you said, an empowering community kind of way, where we can find others and we can find some understanding with ourselves and who we can, get along with a little bit better, or other people that can help understand us. But it was so demonized by others as a negative limiting label. And a lot of that also stems from pop culture. I mean, it's crazy to think the amount of misinformation about ADHD that comes from pop culture. And that is where a lot of the misunderstanding of like what hyperactivity means. I didn't believe I had ADHD because of that. And I was like, no, I'm constantly fatigued. I'm constantly tired. And then come to find out, no, that actually can also mean you have ADHD. It's a misunderstanding. And it's a label that's been added on to a label that then limits what we are to ourselves. And it's crazy how recent it was that you could actually be autistic and have ADHD officially. And if you really look at it, it's, well, you can only have one, not you can't have both. Stemmed from nothing. I mean, it just stemmed from assuming you could not have both. That has been like the fight I think all of us who live with this stuff had to put forward, is like having other people understand. Saying what we are seems like an odd way of putting it, but I think it's kind of appropriate, especially when they view us as something that's so different and alien to them sometimes. And talking a little bit more about ADHD perceived in society, I was reading some stuff that you had written, and you wrote something, is ADHD a superpower? And there
Yeah.
was a quote that really stuck with me, that was, ADHD is not a superpower. ADHD can lead to superpowers, but it can also lead to some serious incidents and disasters. It's very charmed to educate the public only about the positive aspects. It's more appealing and it sells better. But does it actually change the reality? And it sells better is something that really stood out to me, because that is true. And it's what a lot of this stuff, especially going back to talking about, well, if you have this, then go to more like advanced, like special school and things like that. But it's not necessarily always a proper fit. So could you talk a little bit more about that and why it's important not to overly glamorize or fictionalize mental diversity, particularly how that can itself lead to stigma?
Yeah, of course. So I don't think we can, force people to use, very limited narratives when they're telling about their stories. Look, I can totally understand when people come out and say, like, I have ADHD and it's helping me a lot. I don't know, it's helping me with my job or stuff like that, or I've been an entrepreneur or something like that. And, I have all these superpowers. I can totally understand that. But I think when we are, trying to extend that to everybody, like, damage control is very warranted here. Because if we want to, if we demand that kind of narrative from everyone, then we will kind of underestimate their struggles and their sufferings because of that condition. So one example that I always give is accidents. Like, just having ADHD itself, this doesn't have anything with culture, your environment. It's completely internal. Just having ADHD kind of predisposes you to face more accidents in your life. And some of these accidents can be fatal. Like, and you can literally lose your lives because of that. So that accidents can happen in your job. Sometimes, people are working like in factories, and or they're using their hands and stuff like that, and they're being exposed to dangerous situations in their work environment. Sometimes people are just driving, and there will be some moments that they might be exposed to a dangerous situation, and in a grasp of second they might just lose their life. And we can change the situation. Like, if we say that you have superpower and this is all positive and stuff like that, then when people are suffering because of these things, we are kind of like omitting that from the experience and our real lives and saying that, look, I don't want to have anything, I don't want to have anything with that. And I just want to have this narrative. So that's why we should be careful. Like we can look at it in another way. Like when people get the diagnosis, they come for help. They're not like, oh, I have this information. I now know that I have ADHD. So, let's get on with it and let's go with my life and, do whatever that I want with it and stuff like that. They actually come forward and asking for help. They say that, oh, now that I have received this diagnosis, I'm struggling with X, I'm struggling with Y, I'm struggling with Z. So what should I do about this? So this alone is showing that a lot of people are struggling with different things, and whether it's about their academic performance, whether it's about their work performance, sometimes they're struggling with real emotional problems in their relationships, in their marriages, I don't know, in the relationship with their children and stuff like that. So all these things are showing us that it's all, depends on every single person. So if I have ADHD, I learn about it and I'm really deeply struggling. So I should really be able to express that and seek help. Now, if I'm another person, I'm having ADHD, like I'm already an entrepreneur, and even having ADHD has actually helped me to become a successful entrepreneur. I should also be, free to come forward and express that, this has happened because of that. So what I'm trying to say here is that both things matter. So I can't come and say that, oh, only we should focus on the superpower thing and neglect the experience of people that are suffering. And the problem that we are having today, especially, is that those people are actually the ones that need the most help. And their voices are the ones that we hear the less, for example, when you open up LinkedIn, what is the narrative that you're seeing from ADHD? What's the most narrative that is circulating around the social media like in LinkedIn today? You see the superpower thing. Like everybody is saying that, yeah, I have ADHD and everything is flourishing and I'm doing this in my job, I'm doing that in my relationship. And when I see that, it kind of always reminds me that, oh, just in this week, I had like 10 clients that they were all suffering in their lives. And if they come forward and, put out a message out there on LinkedIn, they might, feel ashamed for it, like because they will make a comparison of their own lives with the lives of all these, successful people out there. And they will like, I have the same thing that they're having, so why they are so successful and I'm struggling? We are like leading to that stigma and leading to that shame feeling and all that. And we should encourage both sets of group. I think if someone is successful, it's completely fine. But if someone is struggling and someone is deep pain because of that, like they can't finish their university, they can't even find a job. Like I've had a lot of clients that they are massively struggling with just choosing their field. Like, what's the best field for me? Like, what should I do with my academics and stuff like that? Or what should I do with my job? Or they have even tried different jobs and they're still struggling to find something that they can find meaning and they can find a secure and a stable, income for their personal lives. And these things matter. Like they reach their 30s, they reach their 40s, and they're still struggling with these kind of problems. And we should, provide an atmosphere that everybody can find kind of security that they can come forward and talk about this and share that they can even struggle and they can receive pain. And all should be fine. I'm always for freedom of speech, and that's why I think just focusing on superpower narrative is dangerous because of this.
I think what you're asking for is to be more realistic, right? Just be real. We have problems, we have strengths, but in my own personal journey, I feel just having an awareness. For instance, you mentioned accident prone. Definitely. But once you have that awareness, then you can work with it. Once you know yourself, you can learn to use it in a way that helps you, right? The same energy I see everything as energy, can cause an accident or make you an entrepreneur because you have this hyperactivity, can get distracted. So we can work with it. So it's really important to know who we are and what doesn't work and what works, and also be fearless in vocalizing that. A lot of times I see people are aware, but they don't want to speak it because of other problems.
That's true, but there's one other important point, and that is that there are massive individual differences. So, for example, not even between two persons, we won't see a same ADHD. Like the person A has a different ADHD from the person B, and the person A has different capacities to cope with ADHD comparing to the person B. So another dangerous thing that we see today, for example, again on LinkedIn, I mention LinkedIn a lot because that's where I see the communities the most. For example, people are trying to say that, yeah, I'm going drug free and everything is, working perfectly and it's working fine. I've been able to do this and that. And that's true, but the problem is that's not going to work for everybody. So not all people have the same capacity to deal with something, anything. It's not just about ADHD, just almost anything. We would expect the same thing from them. So people will come and say, oh, for example, somebody is dealing with ADHD just with, I don't know, cold showers, for example. And then that person would go on and try that and it won't work. And then, they would ask a question from themselves that if somebody else is trying that and it's working for them, then why shouldn't I be able, to get the same result? And that's why that sort of messaging is a little bit dangerous because it would give people a sort of, imagination that, oh, so there will be a very exact formula that if I, implement that in my personal life, then everything will be fine. But that's not true. And that's one of the main problems that we have today in terms of therapeutic things, because different things will work with different people. So cold showers, for example, might work for me, but for a lot of other people that have ADHD and they are the same age for like me, it won't work for them. So we should just encourage everybody to find something that works for them personally. So for one person, it might be anything but drugs, and I don't care what that thing is. So anything can work, and they get real results in their life. For some other people, they might actually need, I don't know, more help, like giving from drugs or other form of therapy. Some people might need psychotherapy. Some people might need coaching. Some people might need even more support in their inner circles from their environment. So I always try to encourage these personal formulas that I think everybody should try to figure out what would work for them. And I think it's another danger that we are facing, especially in these social medias, because everyone, when they see that when they figure out something that's working for them, then they think that, oh, now it's time to come out and say it to all the world. Look, guys, I have found the formula and this will remedy ADHD for everybody. But that's a little, dangerous notion.
Yes. So thank you for saying it's dangerous because it goes over so many people's heads. And even when they mean really well, but it's important to always understand your power whenever you're like giving that kind of advice. There needs to be caveats of it's just not going to work for everybody. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's also dangerous because when it doesn't work for somebody and they see that it has for others, there's that feeling of what am I doing wrong or am I worse? It creates a shame spiral that only exacerbates things even more. And even going even further, let's say there's a magical world where there were two people and their ADHD traits were 1-to-1, like exactly this, practically clones of one another, but they had completely different socioeconomic status or lived in specific different environments that were completely different from one another. The how those traits help and hinder them are still going to be completely different based on that. You have to take in everything about a person into account, not just the traits, not just, what has been helpful to them, like so far in the past. There could be other instances where advice for employment for one person is completely unhelpful to the other person based on the location that they're in. And I think a lot of times for certain people on social media, they unintentionally so misunderstand their own privilege when it comes to their environment or their like particular status or what they're able to do, and they like, dole out advice, which they can still, of course, dole out, but you have to do it with, always put an asterisk at the end and always try to explain that these are things to explore and get you thinking about coping mechanisms or what could work for you. It's not always like a how to step one through step five, equals profit at the end. Like it doesn't realistically work that way.
Yeah, that's completely true. And I see a lot of people are going through this sort of experience that are saying, look, this is not at any level an illness or disease or any sort of, pathologizing condition. If we are struggling, it's because of the system. So if the systems, environments, if they were set up in the right way, we would be completely fine. And part of it, I think, has come from that book, I think from Mr. Hartman, The Farmers and Hunters of the World. So it's saying that ADHDs are coming from the line of hunters of the past. And I actually read that book and it completely made sense to me because, one of the things that hunters had was that they should be very alert towards any sort of, cues in their environment. So they should have been simultaneously aware of everything in their, visual fields and all the senses that they have. So it kind of makes sense that evolutionary, it might have come from that sort of thing. But I try to, remain very practical about this. So, for example, when my clients come to me and say that, look, now that I have this diagnosis, what should I do with others? Like, should I go to my family members? Should I go to my coworkers and tell them that I have this thing and they have to, accommodate these problems or anything that I'm experiencing? And I always tell them that, look, if you found anybody, any person that listened to your story and, treated you very with acceptance and very, warm hearts and all that, then you should, be very grateful for it and talk to them about it. But you shouldn't expect this kind of treatment from everybody out there. So not all systems are going to acknowledge that. Not all individuals are going to acknowledge that. And I don't think even it's possible for people that don't have ADHD to completely understand all of the, aspects of somebody that is living with this and all these aspects of this condition and like that. So even if we say that that hypothesis is true, that ADHD is not a disease, it's not an illness or medical condition, and it's just happening because systems are not accommodating for it. Even if we take that as true, I have, I always say people should ask this question that, okay, but that these systems will finally accommodate for everything that ADHDers need to have in their environments in order to become successful. Like if you're going to an ordinary school in your town, and for example, you have a child with ADHD, if you go out to them and tell them that, my child is struggling with ADHD, will they actually listen to you? Or I don't know, if you go to your workplace and tell them that, for example, I have ADHD and I don't have to, come at a certain hour. I don't want certain types of, meetings and all that. Will they actually listen and accommodate for that? Because if they won't do that, then you don't have any other choice but make some inner adaptations. Like if you're going to wait until all these systems and all the things that we have built basically all our civilizations based upon, then you have to wait forever because I don't think they're going to accommodate completely and freely with all their open hearts. There will be always these struggles. So the sooner that you realize it's okay that not everybody is going to accept my diagnosis, and I have to make some adaptations in order to improve my current condition, I think the better will it be for you in terms of mentality and having more peace internally. Because if you want to just see the accommodations from the systems and other people, I think you will be always disappointed because there will be somebody or some sort of in a workplace or I don't know any other thing that they will make you heavily disappointed, and then you will be, sitting there with empty hands and asking yourself why this happened. Well, that's just a reality. I don't think we can change that anytime soon.
Yeah, I think in any relationship, right, it's a two-way street. You do your part, you show up as much as you can. I see that like the equator, right? You're on two sides of the pole. You need to put an effort to go at least to the equator. And whether the other person shows up there is left up to them. You can change that, whether it's a work environment, if it's a boss, if it's a friend, spouse, whoever. But you still have to do your part, right? I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And also, I wanted to talk about the hunter brain and how we could
Yeah.
actually use that. Because for being a hunter, instincts are really important and intuition is really important. And we all have that, but we don't use it enough because we're not taught. Who taught about tapping into that intuition in school? There was no class for that. There was no training for that. But the more and more you train yourself to listen to that intuition, that gut feeling, and the way it shows up for everybody has a different way of tapping into that. But once you learn what works for you, it's magical. Where you make the move, where you're careful, where you want to make that strike, it's amazing actually. And for me, it works with meditation. I do that every day. I couldn't do without it once I learned that secret, but it's magical. And I think we should do that. We should use our strengths.
But I think like if we are going to, find one of those superpowers, actually is creativity. So even that hunter mind, I think the most important thing it's giving you is that you can, well, think outside the box. So when people are thinking, they usually find they're finding a linear path in their thinking and in their structure. So they won't go, try to look like a third person or look from outside the structure. But when you are, trying to simultaneously notice everything in the environment, that would make you creative. And I think, especially for adults that have ADHD, the best thing that they can do for themselves is that try to find something that they can utilize this creativity in their life, whether it's regarding a job, a career, or I don't know, academic field or something else. Because if they find that and they can do it every day, like becomes a routine for them, it really gives them an advantage, a competitive advantage. And in the long term, they will see that they're getting ahead of a lot of people and, they can find great meaning for their life. They can find success, especially because, well, we see that with a lot of adults, then it's difficult for them to overcome all these feelings of shame and self-defeating patterns that they experience throughout their lives. So if you find that, then I think you're set up for, I hope, good life then. And even personally for me in my job, this sort of thinking actually helps me a lot because during the session my mind is always, trying to make all these patterns from the client's stories and trying to make sense out of them. I'm just immediately through the moment I, reject one of the hypotheses and try to, explore some of the other hypotheses that I feel they are right. So it kind of helps in psychotherapy as well. And I hope that everyone can find that niche for their own personal story. Because if they do, I think then ADHD is not something that's going to stop you that much. If you can utilize it, then you end up very fine, I guess.
So well said and so true
Yeah,
across the board. Thank you for sharing that and sharing a lot of your wisdom. How can people listening find you, contact you, look you up for services?
well, first of all, thank you both for having me here. It was a delightful conversation. And well, I'm on LinkedIn. with my own name. And recently, I actually tried to make my Twitter account active so they can find me with therapy for real. And I actually have an Instagram account as well, but those are, mainly with Persian content. So for English speakings, I think the best ones are LinkedIn and Twitter.
Great. I'll be sure to include everything that I can in the show notes so everybody can seek you out. Once again, thank you for coming on. This has been a great conversation, and just wish you all the luck going forward, with the PhD and everything else. And thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we met on LinkedIn. There's so much benefit from social media. It's the way you use it, right? And I'm glad we met. And thank you for joining us on the show, and good luck for your future.
Thank you. And just let me add this final thing. I think I want to encourage all ADHDers to use more of social medias, because I think they're always afraid of getting hooked up and getting addicted. But I think they provide fascinating opportunities. So I just hope people again get help any sort of way that they can.
Definitely. There's something to creating a ADHD, brain hive, essentially, using social media. And I think we've gone actually pretty far with ADHD research thanks to social media. So there are positive aspects to it, folks. You just gotta learn to use it. But for all of us here at Spark Launch, we'll see you next time.